Hello, everybody. Now I'm your boss, Joe Boss. So far, things have been so far so good. We're gonna wrap up this week in the stream today. And we got a few things on the docket to talk about. So first, let's go through some of these charts. We got DXY here, moving essentially as expected into the end of the week, which was sideways. A lot of dollar pairs had a nice little bump today on some revised CPI news. New Zealand dollar performed quite nicely. Yield spreads coming in. And it seems like we are on path for this trajectory here. So hopefully I'll find a spot to trade this myself. This would have been a nice one if you avoided that wick. But New Zealand following expectations. Let's go ahead and check out this here real quick. Isn't that nutty? I think it was Australian. Yeah, it was Australian. Check this out on the day. So it went right into the expected closing area that we forecasted a couple of days ago, or expected from a couple of days ago. And check this out. The high of today went right to the expected top for the day when you have a particularly strong move. Nice hit there. Nice little precise hit. Euro dollar holding in there, going sideways. Yield spreads seem to be improving. Yeah, across the board, they seem to be improving, except for this 3-year here, and again on the intermediate side of things. Probably, I'd say later towards the end of next week, we'll probably see some improvement if the dollar continues to weaken. Let's see. Canadian dollar holding up. Intermediate yield spreads are starting to improve, but long-term and short-term, pretty bad still. Pretty bad. Next week's range, exactly the same as this week. So let's look at our seasonal expectations. Yeah, that's why we drew this. Let's look at our downside risk seasonally. Yeah, next week is quite volatile. So if the dollar gets weaker, I'd probably expect to see 134. Let's check out the equities today. They had a particularly good day. Ooh, pretty flat look for next week. That's a bit risky. How about on the high side? Wow. I don't know about you, but I'm not too bullish next week. Essentially, what I'm thinking is something like this into CPI. And then down low, I have No clue how much lower it's going to go. So an up and down, maybe. Real quick before I set these in stone, what does the seasonal forecast look like? Wow. Look at that. Very strong seasonal expectations over the next week. That is very, very strong seasonality. So yeah, that might just carry you through to some pretty crazy highs. Yeah, like I said, once you're in this spot here, yeah, once you're crossing this spot, it's a bit hard to tell where exactly your top is going to end up. You definitely could hit that spot next week. So, if the seasonality pulls through and the bullishness pays off, you could just end up with a rip roar and a tear up to, call it 50.90. Let's check out this. Again, the closing odds line up well with that. And you do get a high in this area here, this 40-point range, about 30% of the time. Well, if this momentum holds up, that's definitely going to be in the cards. Then probably some kind of drift pullback into the close. All right, let's look at our lows. Again, when I look at these probabilities here, again, these are seasonal probabilities. So each sample in this shape here is only over the last 20 years. You actually can use frequency. Here we go. Pivot probabilities, use frequency. Instead of probabilities, it'll show you the exact count. So these frequencies and these probabilities, they're all flat, fairly uniform in this area here. It's like guessing. But given this momentum, given the positive seasonality, given the risk-on nature, frankly, going into next week with the hype around the CPI revisions and the expectation that CPI will continue to disinflate at the next release. Again, I'm still of the mind that even if CPI comes out as expected, it's not going to move the Fed. CPI really has to come in below the forecast. Like, it has to come in the low 20 basis point area. Which, I don't know if it'll get there, but it's definitely possible. And I'm not too fond of being insanely long the risk on for these markets explicitly, because if these central banks stay on hold until the end of the first half, beginning of the second half of 24, it'll put a drag on all risk equities and all risk assets. So let's take this week by week. And going into this next week, we're probably not ready to start the fall off. But who's to say? This is just my expectation for next week on the S&P. Let's go ahead and check out the ES real quick. Again, similar story. These are the expectations from yesterday. That CPI getting revised really, really helped out. So I'll go ahead and slap these forecasts in. Again, you can see this line here where I drew the alert for, hey, oh, let me hide this. Going past here, you're going into no man's land of figuring out where your top's going to be. So this is really the edge of my bullish expectation for the S&P. Outside of that, it's something that has to be taken day by day. Yeah, let's go with that. Again, nice bullish seasonality still showing up here on the ES as well. Yep. And then it falls off here going into the week after. You can see the seasonality starts to get pretty choppy here going into March and the latter half of February. So cautiously optimistic, fairly optimistic for next week, not so much for kind of the month ahead past that. But again, anything can change. Yeah, it's essentially riding this first deviation of the cone, up, 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 just following this. All right. Bum, bum, bum. Nothing there on the individual equity side of things. Let's check out gold. I had more bullish expectations for gold going into next week here. Let's go ahead and see if anything has changed significantly. Yeah. Again, on the month expectations are still pretty good. But I don't think this expectation of going all the way up here next week is terribly in the cards. Let's go ahead and check out lows for next week. Yeah, something more along these lines seems reasonable to me. Then up into a close. Wow, check that out. Pretty good concentration of closes there. Let's go ahead and check out our ranges. Oh, you got a peak. So that looks good. Something along these lines maybe. Actually, I can reuse this. Yeah, that looks like a good stop. Something along these lines. looks good. Check out the closing odds. Pretty wide band on closing range. Most of your closes are a bit lower, so maybe you get a pop-up and then a reversal. So fairly range bound. That's what my expectation is for next week on gold. Let's go ahead and check out crude. And so far, so good. Oh, didn't mean to move that. We can lock that in place to stop that from moving in the future. Yeah, that one has gone pretty much exactly as expected since the 4th of February. So let's check out the week ahead. Yep, we can now look at where our lows are next week. A lot of lows down here, so would not be surprised to see some sort of pullback here on oil. I'm going to set that to red. Put on a timestamp. Let's look at our highs. Again, very aggressive highs. So there's a real likelihood that on more bullish risk on expectations into next week, you just don't even get this pullback, that you just see the continuation like the forecast we made yesterday. But now that these ranges have expanded, we can probably shift this a bit higher. I'm going to check out the monthly spot here. Yeah, that monthly spot hasn't changed, so we'll keep that as our monthly expectation. Yeah, it's still inside that range. Still probable. What I'm noticing is that with this 33% up here, there's a room for a bit of overshoot of this box. So I'll go ahead and put in another box. Let's say between 250 and this spot here. Call that the overshoot. All right. Let's look at our closing odds. Just want to get my arrow. The nominal expectation would be something like a move lower, then a grind higher into the close, or from here into the close. Either of these, I'm going to be prepared for. Whether or not we get the pullback or not, I think my net expectation is we will close around the 79, 78 range next week. Yep, that lines up. So I'm expecting next week to be a green week from open to close. But how we get there depends on if this momentum is going to continue, or if we get some down move the first couple 2 days here, 3 days here, and then go back up, or if we just continue, hit these spots here, and reverse off that. All right. Let's see here. Bonds, we can skip that for now. Crypto, Bitcoin. Hey, that's a good stop. Again, Bitcoin will always surprise you. Bitcoin will always give you surprises. And I mentioned this is a tricky spot here because you get a little bit more bullishness and you can rip, roar, and tear. What's going on here? It takes too long. It does that sometimes. Well, the lows loaded that time. But I kind of want the highs to load. Yeah, you can see really far out move. There we go. Got it to load now. Again, the weird part is that it says it takes too long to load or too long to execute. Yet when it does load and it does execute, it loads instantly. So still, at this spot here, I still feel pretty good on the short side going into end of week. That is a very unlikely high. But then again, when you go past this, you are dealing with more tail scenario. And again, when you look at the distributions for Bitcoin, you can see that these things get pretty fat tail. So you got to be careful on short trades with this thing. It's just shorting Bitcoin is kind of a death sentence. I'm just going over my expectations, and that was very fairly set. Okay. Let's go ahead, look at our closing odds here. Again, probably a bit of a drift lower into end of week. I'll go ahead and put that. Oh, actually, I thought, yeah, this forecast goes into a low. Based off these odds here. Yeah. So we got to update this line here. So that's my expectation for where we'll close this week on Bitcoin. But I'm still expecting this similar sort of move. Sub 46K. It's just that now that Bitcoin's price has moved higher, these ranges have moved higher along with the current price. So now I'm just shifting my expectation higher. Yep. Hopefully you get a bit of a pullback. Because otherwise, if you do get that blow off top, you're, yeah, past what, 49.5K, past 50K. You're guessing where the top's gonna come in next week. So let's see here. Nominally, I'd expect the move up to here. Pull back. Essentially, another test here at 48K. Yep. And then a close down to here into end of next week. Yeah, the distribution though is more skewed higher up. So let's see. decent number of closes up here too, plus 20%. Yeah, I'll leave this line generally where it is. That looks good. Maybe this can inch a bit higher. Set that back to the highs. Yeah, something along this path. Based off the odds that I'm seeing with these tools, that would be my expectation going into next week. Let's see here. Any other currencies I can check out? Oh yeah, we can do euro into next week. Pretty good odds of bullish continuation, and if you don't get it, probably coming back to the bottom of that wick right there. Don't want to be totally guessing here. But let's go ahead and look at, yeah, the yields again are improving. Always want to keep those yields in count when looking at the FX side of things. So this would be my nominal expectation going into next week. Yeah, it's kind of splitting hairs whether you get your low here, your low here. Why I have quite a bit of uncertainty around where the low next week's gonna show. I'd say the upside is pretty capped though. A lot of your highs are coming in here below 108.15. But you go past that and now it's a guessing game. You got a wide range to deal with here, 50 pip range. So let's go ahead and slap on this. Yeah, could have some overshoot. All right, let's look at our closing odds. That is super choppy. Super choppy. You have a big chunk of closes that occur around here, just below what 1075, and a chunk of your closes here. So I'm kind of split on my expectation. Again, seasonal expectations aren't necessarily lining up with the distribution. Let's try biasing the distribution. It does bias a bit lower. Yeah, it does bias a bit lower. Not by much, but again, as we start trading into next week, as new information comes out, we're going to be updating our expectations as we go along. This is just preliminary expectations going into the week ahead. Again, as new information comes out, you gotta be flexible. And yeah, man, wasn't that a wonderful call? I still had bullish expectations going into the end of the week, but the yield spreads started to reverse here. Again, the yield spreads still look pretty healthy. They still look pretty darn green here. Still good potential for more upside, I think. Let's focus on next week. Yeesh. Another pretty uniform look on the distribution side of things. Yeah, figuring out where the high is going to be is not the easiest thing to figure out at the moment. I guess I will focus on closing odds then. Ooh, closing odds are pretty bearish next week. All right. With that in mind, let's say that the high is here, assuming, let's make that assumption. So let's go red. Nope, green, because that's a bullish move. And then take that to a close, which would be roughly in this zone there. And that generally lines up with the nominal largest seasonal probability for next week. And I'm content with that, given if these yield spreads continue to worsen. They were improving over here, and now they're not improving. They could flip again, but we'll have to wait and see next week if that is actually the case or not. Aussie is in a very similar situation here. Oh, there we go. Music died there for a sec. I'm going to make the same expectation for next week on Aussie. But I'm going to have more concentrated bearish expectations. And as far as the close goes, probably a rebound after you hit that low. So this is my setup for Aussie dollar going into the week ahead. See how fast it is to do these trade plans for the day ahead, the week ahead, the month ahead. Yeah, New Zealand's definitely got a bit more upside. It's got a bit more kick here. Considering these yield spreads are improving more significantly than the other ones, I'll go ahead and set a more bullish expectation. I'm just not totally sold on it. I know these yield spreads are turning green here, so I'm going to focus on the closing odds. And again, even if you got this rip higher, call it for another 60, call it 50 to 80 pips higher, a lot of your closes are still way down there. Yeah, way down here. So maybe there's a pull up or pull down. By the way, my closing expectations are not so fantastic, to say the least. Let's try biasing this. Oh, it is already biased. There you go. See how different that looks? So just a quick explanation. This auto look back, with it turned on, it uses all the available data on the chart's history. With it toggled off, it uses this value here. So it's looking back 3,000 bars, which will bias your data to the most recent 3,000 bars. With it on, it uses all the available history, which can be a lot more, multiples more than 3,000. So I'd say with this in mind, even if you do get the higher move, again, those closing odds on the seasonality. I mean, there is this chunk here and this chunk here. Just gotta be careful. Yeah, definitely gotta be careful with the New Zealand volatility, for sure. Yeah, this one's a bit trickier, in my opinion. Yeah. Let's go and check out the seasonal forecasts over the next few days here. Just get more information. Oh, look, bullish seasonality. That helps round down the expectation. And still quite nice bullish closes up here. And again, the original plan from yesterday, up, up, and away. Instead of doing something like this into the end of the month, having this thing just shoot up and then come down into end of month looking like that would also be acceptable. So here's something I'm going to do, just to help make it easy on the annotations. I'm going to draw this little box here, identifying the monthly target, go down to the week, and there you go. There's your weekly and your monthly overlap. So let's go with this. Let's say New Zealand, given the information that we have so far, does get the more bullish continuation and outperform the FX market. Let's say if the great momentum from last week continues into this week, just like the S&P did. Well, just like we have set for our expectations on the S&P. Yeah, check the cones as well, still within nominal range. I don't think there's anything else for me to check. I don't know, maybe it gets a slight pullback, but that'd only be maybe 20-ish pips pullback, potentially. And then good upside risk. There's fairly decent upside risk to the New Zealand dollar next week. And that lines up exactly with our greatest seasonal probability bin here with the probability pivot points. All right. So, with that all done, part of the headline for the stream here is that TradingView has a new competition called the Leap.